The airport shuttle had barely pulled away from the terminal when the woman beside me leaned closer, slipped a silver band from her coat pocket onto her finger, and whispered without looking at me. "Please don't react. For the next 4 hours, you're my fiancée." I turned toward her slowly. She looked to be about 30, dressed in a navy coat with reins still glistening across the shoulders. Her expression never changed, but her fingers trembled against the strap of her handbag. Then I noticed what she was staring at. Near the front of the shuttle sat a broad, shouldered man in a charcoal jacket, pretending to scroll through his phone while checking every reflection in the windows. He wasn't watching the road. He was watching her. Most people would have laughed. Some would have moved seats. Others would have demanded an explanation. Instead, I smiled warmly, reached over, and took her hand as naturally as if we'd been together for years. "There you are," I said loudly enough for the man to hear. "I was beginning to think you'd missed the flight." The woman blinked once. Then she squeezed my hand so tightly that I understood she'd been holding herself together by sheer determination. The man looked away. Only then did she breathe. "My name is Adrian Hale. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 12 years I've worked as a search and rescue pilot along the northern coast. Storms, mountain rescues, medical evacuations, missing hikers. If someone's worst day happens in the air, there's a decent chance my crew is coming for them. People often assume flying helicopters requires fearless nerves. They're wrong. Fear isn't the enemy. Panic is. My instructor once told me something I've carried ever since. A frightened pilot can still save lives. A panicked one never will. So I learned to stay calm, even when engines failed. Even when visibility disappeared. Even when families waited on frozen cliffs praying we'd return with someone they loved. Unfortunately, remaining calm became the only thing I knew how to do. Especially after my mother died. She had spent 40 years running a tiny bookstore in Harbor Ridge. Everyone in town knew her. She remembered birthdays, favorite authors, children's names, dogs' names. If someone looked lonely, she'd somehow find exactly the right novel to hand them. Her favorite sentence wasn't from a book. It was something she'd tell me every Sunday after closing. "Kindness is rarely wasted, Adrian. Even when nobody remembers it." She passed away from a stroke almost 4 years earlier. Quick, unexpected, ordinary Tuesday morning. The kind that changes every Tuesday after it forever. After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to sell the bookstore. I couldn't even walk inside. I simply locked the front door and left everything exactly where she'd left it. Coffee mug. Reading glasses. Half-finished crossword. Like preserving the room might somehow preserve her. My fiancée, well, my former fiancée, Emily, waited nearly a year for me to come back to life. Eventually she sat across from me one evening and quietly admitted something I'd already known. "I still love you," she'd said. "But I don't know how to keep loving someone who disappeared without leaving." She wasn't cruel. She wasn't angry. She was exhausted. I let her leave because I knew she deserved someone who could actually be present. Since then I'd become remarkably good at rescuing strangers while quietly failing to rescue myself. The shuttle rolled onto the highway. Rain streaked sideways across the windows. Beside me, the woman still hadn't released my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know this is insane. I've seen stranger things." She almost smiled. "I doubt that. You'd be surprised." She looked toward the man again. "He'll come over eventually." "Who is he?" "My worst decision." Simple. Flat, like she'd practiced saying it until the emotion disappeared. I nodded once. "Then let's make sure your worst decision believes your best one is sitting beside you." For the first time since she'd sat down, she laughed. Barely. But it was real. Exactly 3 minutes later the man stood. He walked down the aisle with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to invading other people's space. He stopped beside us. "Claire." She looked up. "Daniel. I thought that was you." "I thought so too." His eyes moved to our joined hands. Then to me. "And you are." I stood just enough to offer a handshake. "Adrian." He ignored it. "Interesting." His smile remained. Only his eyes hardened. I didn't realize Claire was traveling with company. Before she could answer, I slid my arm lightly around the back of her seat. "My fiancée hates overnight flights," I said. I promised I'd keep her awake until we reached the resort. The smallest change crossed his face. Not jealousy, calculation. He hadn't expected competition. "Fiancé?" Claire slowly lifted her left hand. The silver ring caught the cabin lights. His eyes fixed on it. "You got engaged. About 6 months ago. I'm surprised nobody mentioned it." She finally looked directly at him. "You'd have to be someone I still spoke to for that to happen." Silence. A long one. Then Daniel laughed. "Good for you." He said it like someone congratulating a rival after losing money. "I let you two enjoy the ride." He returned to the front. Only after he sat down did Claire's shoulders finally drop. She closed her eyes. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything yet. I dragged you into this. You looked like you needed someone. She stared. You didn't even hesitate. My mother would have been disappointed if I had. For several miles neither of us spoke. Rain drummed against the roof. The shuttle passed forests swallowed by evening fog. Finally she asked quietly, did you really mean what you said? What part? That your mother would have been disappointed. I smiled. She believed strangers were simply friends whose names you hadn't learned yet. Claire looked out the window. My father used to say something similar. What happened to him? He died before I finished college. I'm sorry. So am I. Silence settled again. Comfortable this time. The kind that doesn't demand conversation. Eventually she turned back. I should probably explain why I just introduced you as the man I'm marrying. I was hoping you would. She inhaled slowly. My full name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31. And Daniel. She paused. Was supposed to become my husband last year. Daniel had proposed beneath a lighthouse overlooking the Atlantic. At least, that's the story everyone still loved to tell. Pictures of the moment had been shared thousands of times online. Friends called it perfect. Their parents framed the photographs. Even strangers commented about how lucky they looked together. Claire used to believe those pictures. Then, 8 months before the wedding, she opened Daniel's laptop to print seating charts. A message appeared before the printer settings did. Not because she had been snooping. Because he'd forgotten to close it. Last night was incredible. Another message followed. She still doesn't suspect anything. There were dozens, months worth, different hotels, different cities, plans stretching nearly a year. I remember reading every word. Claire said quietly, never taking her eyes from the rain outside. Not because I wanted to. Because once I started, I couldn't stop. I stayed silent. People carrying heavy memories rarely needed interruptions. They needed room. I confronted him that night. What happened? He cried. She laughed once. It held no amusement. He apologized so perfectly that if I hadn't already seen everything, I probably would have believed him. You didn't. No. So I left. I nodded. That sounds simple. It wasn't. She smiled sadly. It never is. The shuttle rolled through another stretch of highway. The driver turned the radio lower as darkness settled over the mountains. Claire continued. The wedding wasn't just ours. What do you mean? My younger brother, Evan, had accepted a job at Daniel's father's architecture firm. She folded her hands together. Our families had become inseparable. Vacations, holiday dinners, business partnerships. Every important event for almost 4 years included both families. When I ended the engagement, she swallowed. Daniel didn't lose time feeling guilty. He started protecting himself. How? He told everyone I'd become emotionally unstable. My jaw tightened. He said wedding stress made me paranoid. She nodded. He claimed I'd imagined the affair. And people believed him. The people who wanted life to stay uncomplicated did. She looked toward the dark window. It's easier to believe one woman had a breakdown than accept someone they've admired for years built his whole life on lies. I understood that better than I wished. Truth doesn't always lose because it's weak. Sometimes it loses because it arrives second. So why are you both headed to the same resort? My cousin. She sighed. She's getting married tomorrow. I waited. The groom happens to be Daniel's closest friend. There it was. The missing piece. I thought about staying home. But my cousin helped raise me after my father died. Her voice softened. I couldn't miss her wedding. So now you're trapped for 4 days with him. She nodded. He'll spend the weekend charming everyone. And everyone still thinks you're the one who broke his heart. Exactly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Not because there was nothing left to say. Because there was too much. About 20 minutes later the shuttle stopped at a roadside service station. Passengers climbed out to stretch their legs. Claire remained seated. So does that mean we're staying engaged for the coffee break too? She looked at me nervously. You don't have to. I stood. If we're doing this, we might as well be convincing. She laughed. You really commit. My job requires it. Outside, cold wind carried the smell of wet pavement and pine trees. I bought 2 coffees. When I returned, Claire accepted hers with both hands. You remembered. What? I always order without sugar, I guessed. She looked puzzled. How? You wrapped your fingers around the cup before drinking. So, people who take sugar usually stir first. She blinked. You notice everything. Occupational hazard. We found a quiet bench beneath the station awning. Rain tapped rhythmically against the metal roof. For several minutes we simply watched passing trucks spray mist across the highway. Finally Claire asked, were you happy before your mother died? The question caught me off guard. I answered anyway. I think so. You think? I spent so much time working that I assumed there would always be another Sunday to visit her bookstore. I stared into my coffee. There wasn't. Claire didn't offer comforting cliches. She didn't tell me my mother knew I loved her. She didn't say time heals everything. Instead, she asked, what was her favorite book? No one had asked me that in years. The Wind in the Willows. Claire smiled. Mine was always Jane Eyre. My mother loved that one. I know. I looked up. How? Every bookstore owner recommends the books that changed them. For the first time in years. I laughed without forcing it. Back on the shuttle, something had shifted. We weren't simply performing anymore. We'd begun discovering each other. She taught literature at a community college. Her students often stayed after class just to talk about novels. She admitted she collected antique postcards from places she'd never visited. I confessed I'd once flown through a thunderstorm to rescue an elderly man who refused to leave his dog behind. She laughed until tears gathered in her eyes. You actually carried the dog first, didn't you? I did. I knew it. How? You have that look. What look? The kind people get when helping feels more natural than walking away. Nobody had ever described me that way. Emily used to say I buried myself inside work, because it was easier than living. Claire looked at the exact same habit Oneo, and somehow found kindness inside it. One observation made me feel broken. The other made me feel useful. Funny how the same person can exist inside two completely different stories. Halfway through the journey, Daniel walked toward the restroom. He paused beside us. I've been meaning to ask, he said casually. When's the wedding? Claire answered before I could. October. Small ceremony. I smiled. My mother always believed weddings should be about people, not productions. Daniel glanced between us. And where did you two meet? Claire looked at me. For a split second neither of us spoke. Then, somehow, we answered together. At the bookstore. Daniel frowned. The bookstore. I nodded naturally. Claire knocked over an entire display. She grinned instantly. You told me afterward that books heal faster than people. And you bought 4 novels you never intended to read. I still haven't. Daniel watched us another moment. He was searching for cracks. There weren't any. Because without realizing it, we'd stopped inventing details. Somewhere during the drive, the imaginary relationship had begun borrowing truths. Truths that belonged to neither of us before today, but somehow fit perfectly now. Daniel finally smiled. Congratulations. This time the word sounded heavier. Almost uncertain. After he walked away, Claire leaned close enough that only I could hear. I almost forgot we were pretending. I looked out at the rain sliding across the glass. So did I. The rain finally stopped just before sunset. Clouds parted over the mountains, letting strips of golden light spill across the valleys below. For a long while neither of us spoke. The silence no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to two people who had discovered they could simply exist beside each other without needing to fill every empty space. Claire rested her forehead lightly against the cool window. You know something? What? I almost didn't board this shuttle. I looked over. I stood inside the terminal for 15 minutes, debating whether to rent a car instead. What changed your mind? She smiled faintly. I convinced myself I was being dramatic. She let out a slow breath. Funny how often women do that. I knew exactly what she meant. Not because I'd lived it. Because I'd seen it. Hundreds of emergency calls. People apologizing for calling ambulances. Apologizing for being scared. Apologizing while bleeding. As though becoming someone else's inconvenience was somehow worse than becoming their own tragedy. My mother used to say something similar. Claire turned. What did she say? When your instincts whisper, don't wait until they're screaming. Claire nodded slowly. I wish I'd listened to mine sooner. Darkness settled across the highway. The shuttle lights dimmed. Several passengers fell asleep. The rhythmic hum of tires against wet pavement became almost hypnotic. Claire pulled a paperback novel from her bag. The cover was worn soft from years of reading. I recognized it instantly. Persuasion. She smiled. You've read it. My mother insisted everyone should. It's my comfort book. She traced the spine gently. I reread it whenever life gets noisy. You memorize passages. A few. Favorite. She hesitated. Then quietly recited, all the privilege I claim for my own sex is that of loving longest when existence or hope is gone. The words lingered between us. Not because of romance. Because of recognition. There are sentences that don't simply describe people. They find them. You miss her every day, don't you? I asked. My father. She nodded. Sometimes I still catch myself reaching for my phone to tell him something. She laughed softly. Then I remember. I still do that with my mother. Claire looked down. I thought grief was something you finished. So did I. It's not. No. It's something you learn to carry. Her eyes met mine. Some days it gets lighter. Some days it doesn't. I nodded. But eventually you become stronger than its weight. She smiled. I like that better. Nearly an hour passed before Daniel returned. This time he wasn't alone. A woman in a cream sweater walked beside him. She looked friendly enough. Maybe 28. She stopped beside our seats. Daniel, she said warmly, aren't you going to introduce us? His smile returned instantly, the polished one, the public version. Claire, this is Melissa. Claire nodded politely. It's nice to meet you. Melissa smiled. I've heard a lot about you. There it was. One innocent sentence. One carefully planted landmine. Claire simply replied, I hope some of it was true. Melissa laughed awkwardly. Daniel didn't. And this must be. Melissa looked toward me. My fiancé. Claire answered before anyone else could. Adrian. I offered a handshake again. Melissa accepted it immediately. Warm, genuine. Daniel watched the exchange. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, confusion. People like him understood manipulation. They struggled to understand sincerity. Melissa glanced at Claire's ring. It's beautiful, thank you. Family heirloom. Claire instinctively looked toward me. I answered softly. It belonged to someone who believed kindness should always be passed forward. Melissa smiled. I like that. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. We should probably get back. She nodded. It was lovely meeting you both. After they disappeared toward the front of the shuttle, Claire remained quiet. Finally she whispered. I almost told her. What stopped you? She looked out into the darkness. She looked happy. I understood immediately. You didn't want to become the reason her evening changed. What if she doesn't know? Claire's voice barely rose above a whisper. What if she's exactly where I was a year ago? The question hung between us. Painfully unanswered. Do you still hate him? I asked after several minutes. Claire thought for a long time. I don't. You don't. I hated him for months. She folded her hands together. But hate keeps you tied to the person who hurt you. She looked toward the sleeping passengers. I got tired of carrying him everywhere. So what do you feel now? Nothing. She smiled sadly. And that's what scares people like Daniel the most. Somewhere after midnight the driver announced another short stop. This one overlooked a lake hidden beneath moonlight. Only a handful of passengers stepped outside. Claire and I wandered toward the railing. Cold air carried the scent of pine and fresh rain. The water below reflected stars like scattered glass. She wrapped her coat tighter. It's beautiful. It is. I haven't noticed beautiful things in a long time. I glanced toward her. I think you've been too busy surviving. She laughed quietly. Maybe. We stood there in comfortable silence. Finally she spoke. Can I ask you something? Of course. If your mother were standing here. She looked toward the lake. What would she tell me? I smiled before answering. She'd probably ask whether you've eaten enough today. Claire laughed. I'm serious. So am I. I could almost hear my mother's voice. Then she'd tell you that people who spend too much time proving they're strong usually deserve the gentlest place to rest. Claire stared across the lake. A tear escaped before she noticed it. She quickly brushed it away. I didn't expect that. Neither did I. When we climbed back aboard, the shuttle was nearly full again. The driver closed the doors. As we pulled onto the highway, Claire slipped her hand into mine. Not because Daniel was watching. He wasn't. Most passengers had fallen asleep. No one was paying attention. She held my hand simply because she wanted to. Neither of us acknowledged it. Neither of us needed to. Outside, the mountains disappeared behind darkness. Inside, for the first time in nearly 4 years, I realized my chest didn't feel empty anymore. Not healed. Not finished. Just less alone. And sometimes, I thought, that is exactly how healing begins. The shuttle rolled beneath the stone entrance of Briar Glen Resort just after 1 in the morning. Warm lights glowed from the lodge windows, spilling across the rain, dark pavement. Passengers stretched, collected luggage, and disappeared toward the reception desk. For the first time in 4 hours, Claire slowly released my hand. The absence surprised both of us. She slipped the silver ring from her finger. I should probably give this back. I looked down at it resting in her palm. Keep it. Her eyes widened. Why not? It belongs to your mother. I smiled gently. My mother would have wanted it to spend the weekend helping someone. Claire looked at the ring for several seconds before carefully sliding it back onto her finger. I'll return it before I leave. You can return it whenever it feels right. She looked at me strangely. You trust people very easily. No. I trust very carefully. Then why me? I picked up my overnight bag. Because frightened people don't usually worry about returning borrowed things. She laughed softly. You always know what to say. I usually don't. Inside the lodge, guests checked in beneath a massive stone fireplace. Laughter echoed through the lobby. Wedding decorations filled every corner. Fresh flowers. Lanterns, handwritten welcome signs. Everything announced celebration. Everything except the knot forming in Claire's stomach. She stopped walking. They're here. Across the lobby stood nearly 20 members of both families. Daniel laughed at something an older man had said. Several people turned. They saw Claire. Then me. The room changed. Not loudly. Quietly. Conversation slowed. Smiles became curious. Eyes drifted toward the unfamiliar man standing beside the woman many still believed had destroyed an engagement. Claire's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. Without speaking, I stepped beside her. Close enough that our shoulders touched. Not possessively. Steadily. She looked at me. You don't have to keep pretending. I know. Then why are you still standing here? Because you're not ready to walk into that room alone. An older woman approached first. Elegant. Silver-haired. Kind eyes clouded with uncertainty. Claire. Aunt Margaret. The older woman embraced her carefully. Not coldly. Not warmly. Like someone unsure which version of the past was true. Then her attention shifted to me. And you must be. Claire hesitated only briefly. This is Adrian, my fiancé. The words sounded different this time, less rehearsed. Almost natural. Margaret smiled politely. It's lovely to meet you. You as well. She studied us for a moment. Then quietly said, it's good to see Claire smiling again. There was something genuine in her voice. Hope, not judgment. Claire heard it too. I felt her shoulders relax. Just a little. Throughout the evening more relatives introduced themselves. Some remained distant. Others welcomed me immediately. No one openly questioned our story. But everyone looked, not at Claire, at us, trying to understand, trying to fit new information into an old narrative. The lies Daniel had spent months building suddenly had competition. Not from arguments, from evidence. Because happy people are difficult to fake for long. And Claire, without realizing it, had started laughing. The rehearsal dinner took place in a glass hall overlooking the lake. Candles reflected across the water. Music floated quietly through hidden speakers. Name cards marked every table. Claire froze again. My seat. It was directly across from Daniel. Of course it was. Whoever organized the seating chart hadn't known history. Or perhaps hadn't believed it mattered. I glanced toward the coordinator. Then toward an empty chair beside mine. We'll fix it. 5 minutes later. After a polite conversation and a simple explanation that we preferred sitting together, the arrangement changed. No drama, no scene. Just 2 chairs exchanged. Claire looked at me as we sat. You make impossible things seem ordinary. My job has always been reducing panic. She smiled. I think you're reducing mine. Dinner progressed surprisingly well. Stories, toasts, laughter. For nearly an hour Daniel said almost nothing. Then, during dessert, he finally stood, glass in hand. I'd like to make a toast. The room quieted. He smiled toward the bride and groom. Spoke about friendship, loyalty, second chances. It was polished. Practiced. Then his eyes drifted toward Claire. And sometimes, he continued smoothly, life surprises us by showing that people eventually become exactly who they're meant to be. Several guests glanced toward our table. Claire lowered her eyes. The implication landed exactly where he'd intended. Not obvious enough to challenge. Sharp enough to wound. I reached beneath the table. Found her hand. Held it. She squeezed back. She never looked at him again. Later that evening, guests gathered on the terrace overlooking the lake. Strings of lights reflected across the water. Someone started playing an old piano inside. Claire leaned against the railing. I'm tired. I know. I forgot how exhausting pretending can be. I looked toward her. What if you stop pretending? She frowned. What do you mean? I searched for the right words. What if, for the rest of this weekend, you stopped trying to convince people you're happy and simply focused on being peaceful? She looked at the water. I don't know how. You already started. When? Back on the shuttle. She smiled. You noticed. I notice most things. She laughed. I know. The next morning the wedding guests gathered in the gardens. Fresh sunlight replaced the rain. Children ran between flower beds. Photographers adjusted cameras. Musicians tuned their instruments. Everything felt lighter. Claire stood before a mirror inside the bridal suite, helping her cousin fasten the back of her dress. You seem different, her cousin said quietly. Claire smiled. Different how? Lighter. A pause. I was worried about you. Claire looked toward the doorway where I waited outside. So was I. Her cousin followed her gaze. I see the reason. Claire answered without hesitation. Partly. Then she surprised even herself. The other part, she smiled softly, is that he reminded me I was never the person everyone said I was. Outside, I stood beneath a maple tree, watching guests arrive one by one. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about loss. I wasn't thinking about the bookstore. Or empty Sundays. Or conversations I'd never have again. I was simply waiting. For the woman who had accidentally stepped into my life, and somehow made it feel full again. The ceremony began just after noon. A breeze drifted across the gardens, carrying the scent of fresh roses and the distant sound of the lake brushing against its shore. Everyone stood as Claire's cousin walked down the aisle. For the first time all weekend, nobody was looking at Claire. They were looking where they should have been all along. At the bride, Claire let out a slow breath beside me. You know, she whispered. This is the first moment since I got here that I forgot he was even here. I smiled. That's progress. She looked at me. No. It's freedom. The ceremony was beautiful. Simple. Honest. Two people promising to choose each other every day. Nothing extravagant. Nothing forced. As the officiant spoke about trust and kindness, I noticed Claire quietly wiping away a tear. Are you okay? I whispered. She nodded. I think I finally am. The reception filled the ballroom with music and laughter. Children raced between tables. Grandparents danced before anyone else. The bride's father gave a speech that made half the room cry. Life, for a few precious hours, became wonderfully ordinary. Then the band announced something neither of us had expected. We'd like to invite all engaged couples onto the dance floor. Claire froze. Her smile disappeared instantly. She looked around. Every face seemed to turn toward us. Not because anyone was suspicious. Because we were new. Because everyone wanted to see the mysterious fiancé. I can't. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I really can't. I stood and offered my hand. You don't have to dance well. She looked terrified. I'll embarrass you. I smiled. Claire, I've landed helicopters in blizzards. I think I can survive stepping on my toes. She laughed despite herself, then slowly placed her hand in mine. The music began. A slow piano melody floated across the ballroom. We found a quiet space near the center of the floor. I should warn you, she murmured. I'm genuinely terrible. I believe you. She immediately stepped on my shoe. There, I warned you. I've endured worse. She laughed again. This time the sound carried. People nearby smiled. Not because we looked perfect. Because we looked real. I rested one hand gently at the middle of her back. Don't look at them. I'm trying not to. Look at me. She did. The nervousness faded. Little by little. Until the room disappeared. There was only music. Only breathing. Only two people who had met by accident less than 24 hours earlier. You know something? She whispered. What? I don't think we've been pretending for a long time. I smiled. I was wondering when you'd say it. She searched my face. When did it stop feeling like a favor? I thought about the answer. It wasn't when you asked me to help. It wasn't when you held my hand. It wasn't even when you told me about Daniel. So when? It was when you asked about my mother instead of trying to fix my grief. Her eyes softened. I realized then. You cared about the person behind the story. A tear escaped before she could stop it. So did you. Across the ballroom I noticed Daniel watching us. Not angrily, not confidently, simply, alone. For the first time all weekend, people weren't gathered around him. Several relatives had quietly begun asking Claire questions. Listening, really listening. Not because she defended herself. Because time had exposed small contradictions. Stories Daniel couldn't keep perfectly aligned. Truth had begun doing what truth eventually does. It arrived, without shouting. Without revenge. Without Claire having to destroy anyone else's happiness. Later that evening Daniel approached me outside the ballroom. The gardens were quiet now. Lanterns glowed beneath the trees. I need a word. I nodded. We walked a short distance from the guests. He folded his arms. So, how much do you actually know? Enough. Claire had told me everything. I didn't need details. I suppose she made herself the victim. I looked at him calmly. No. She never once called herself a victim. He frowned. Then what did she tell you? She told me she hoped you'd become a better man someday. For the first time since we'd met? His confidence cracked. That's all. That's all. Silence stretched between us. Then I added quietly, you know what surprised me most? What? She spent 4 days worrying about everyone else's peace. I looked directly into his eyes. Not once did she ask how to hurt you. Only how not to hurt anyone else. He had no answer. People like Daniel always prepared for arguments. They rarely prepared for grace. He looked toward the ballroom, then back at me. Without another word, he walked away. The wedding ended the following afternoon. Cars packed. Suitcases disappeared. Guests hugged goodbye. Claire and I stood beside my rental car. The silver ring still rested on her finger. She slowly removed it. I promised I'd return this. I looked at the ring, then gently closed her fingers around it. Keep it. She shook her head. I can't. You can. It belongs to your mother. I smiled. My mother believed kindness should travel. I looked at the ring. I think she'd be disappointed if it stopped with me. Claire's eyes filled. You barely know me. I know enough. You know what? That you carried someone else's misunderstanding without becoming cruel. That you protected your family even when nobody protected you. And I smiled. That somewhere between the airport and this parking lot, you rescued someone who thought he couldn't feel anything anymore. She stared at me. I thought I asked you to pretend to be my fiancé. You did. What happened? You became the first person in 4 years who reminded me life was still waiting. She stepped closer. So, what now? I took a slow breath. I don't think pretending makes much sense anymore. Her smile trembled. No. Doesn't? So, would you let me take you to dinner next Friday? She laughed through tears. That's your grand romantic speech. I fly helicopters. I'm better with emergency landings than declarations. She reached up and kissed my cheek. I'd love dinner. I smiled. Good. Because I was hoping this would be our first actual date. Life didn't rush us after that. And I think that's why it lasted. We talked every evening. Visited the old bookstore together. Claire insisted it shouldn't stay closed forever. 3 months later, we unlocked the doors. Dust covered every shelf. Sunlight poured through the windows exactly as it had years before. She picked up one of my mother's handwritten recommendation cards. Books don't replace people, it read. They simply remind us we're never alone. Claire looked at me. She would have liked us. I think so too. We reopened the bookstore that autumn. Claire taught literature during the week. On Saturdays we worked side by side among shelves filled with stories. Children gathered for reading hour. Retired couples stayed for coffee. Travelers wandered in looking for maps and left carrying novels instead. Slowly, the little bookstore became alive again. So did I. A year later I asked Claire to marry me. Not beside a lighthouse. Not at a luxury resort. Inside the bookstore, exactly where my mother's favorite reading chair still sat. I held out a new ring. Simple, elegant, she smiled. Then surprised me. She gently placed the new ring beside the old silver band. I'll wear both. She whispered. One reminds me where love began. The other reminds me why. We married the following spring. A small ceremony. Family friends. Books stacked instead of flowers. Lauder instead of perfection. Before the reception began, Claire squeezed my hand. Remember what your mother used to say. I smiled immediately. Kindness is rarely wasted. She nodded. It wasn't. I looked around at the people celebrating with us. At the bookstore filled once more with life. At the woman who had once sat beside me believing she needed someone to save her. The truth was much simpler. She had never needed saving. She would have survived that weekend exactly as she'd survived everything else, with quiet courage. The one who had been lost was me. She hadn't borrowed a fiancé that rainy afternoon. She had unknowingly found a man who had forgotten how to come home to his own life. And somehow, without planning it, without forcing it, without either of us believing in miracles she led him there,